Yo, what is up guys, Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick preview and prediction for Fabio Wardley versus Frazer Clarke 2. Of course this fight goes down on the undercard of Dmitry Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev, and quite frankly, it's the pick of the undercard. As far as I'm concerned. Of course, this is a rematch. They previously fought in March of this year. That fight ended in a split draw. And the fight itself was, in my opinion, one of the best fights this year. Certainly one of the best fights I've seen this year. Thoroughly enjoyed the first fight. Both guys had a lot of success. Wardley hurt Frazer Clarke a few times, dropped him once. Whereas Wardley had some horrific facial injuries, his nose was bust up, face looked like a bloody mask throughout that fight. Really good fight first time around, and the decision was debated. Some people had Wardley winning, some people had Frazer Clarke winning, whereas others felt the draw was about right. I felt the draw was about right first time around. However, going into this rematch, I have to say, my instinct is telling me Fabio Wardley will win. Going back to the first fight, prior to it, the narrative was that Wardley would get through Frazer Clarke relatively comfortably. Despite Frazer Clarke having a very extensive amateur background, of course he won a silver medal in the Olympics at heavyweight or super heavyweight, a lot more amateur pedigree, but as a pro, to that point, Frazer Clarke hadn't really impressed, you know. He'd looked workmanlike in his fights, not really all that dynamic, strong and whatnot, but he didn't look like he was going anywhere real fast. And going into that first fight, I think most people assumed that Wardley's athleticism, speed and power would be too much for Frazer Clarke. Of course, that wasn't how it ended up, but I do wonder going into that first fight whether Fabio Wardley kind of bought into his own hype, and maybe he didn't take Frazer Clarke as seriously as he should have done. Whereas, you know, Frazer Clarke kind of viewed that fight as like the fight of his life so far in his pro career. There was a lot of negative energy surrounding Frazer Clarke going into that fight as well because he postponed it. They were initially supposed to fight a few months prior, but Frazer Clarke was pulled out of the purse bids. And, you know, a lot of people were calling him a ducker, this, that and the third. He was scared of Wardley, bloody, bloody, blah. And I think that led to a perfect storm. I think Wardley probably overestimated himself, whereas Frazer Clarke viewed it as the fight of his life. You know, he viewed it as him against the world, and I think he fed on that. And as a result, we got a super competitive fight. However, going into a rematch, I have to say, I don't see Frazer Clarke getting all that much better from that first fight. I think Frazer Clarke at this point in time, he's kind of set in his ways. He stayed as an amateur a very long time. You know, Frazer Clarke is what, 33 years old? I don't see Frazer Clarke really changing things up. He's going to be workmanlike. He's going to be coming in behind the jab. He'll try and keep tucked up. And he'll try and box. I just don't see him changing his style all that much. Maybe tactically he can switch things up compared to the first fight. But I don't see him changing stylistically, quite frankly. I think Fabio Wardley has a lot more scope to improve. Because, you know, he's younger. He's got less hardware on his system. And what I mean by that is, you know, he had no amateur pedigree. He's basically still learning on the job now. You know, and combine that with being younger, combine that with being the quicker man, both hand speed and foot speed, combine that with being more explosive, more powerful. I think a guy like Fabio Wardley is probably more able to pick up new tricks because he hasn't had that long, extensive pedigree where he's been boxing one way and he's been taught to box one way under Team GB. Frazer Clarke's had that. So when I say hardware, that's kind of ingrained into his system. He is going to box how he always boxes, with the odd adjustment, the subtle adjustment here and there. Whereas again, Wardley had no amateur pedigree. He turned to boxing late, and he's got by on athletic ability. And sometimes that can be obviously a downfall when you don't have that solid base of fundamentals. And we saw that in the first fight. But on the flip side, I do believe a guy like Wardley can more drastically change his style, more so than a guy like Frazer Clarke. For me, in this rematch, Fabio Wardley has to be more selective with his power shots. I think he needs to be more conscious of using his foot speed, moving laterally, moving left and right, not just backwards, maintaining range, sniping from the outside, be more active with the jab. That is for certain for me, because throughout that first fight, throughout a lot of it, I felt that Frazer Clarke's jab was more effective. And of course, that does come from that base of fundamentals, but I want to see more jabbing from Fabio Wardley in this fight, with more lateral movement, and trying to really hone what he does well, trying to utilise what he does well, and that is his explosiveness, that is his speed. Sniping from the outside, I would say, almost. Less gung-ho tactics, because, Wardley does get involved in tear-ups, maybe way too much. We of course saw that in the first fight, we even saw that with Nathan Gorman. But what I think Wardley should be doing here is trying to lead on Frazer Clarke. Again, sniping from the outside with the jab, using that lateral movement, and getting the slower man to try to lean in, to try and lunge in, to try and reach with his punches. And then at that point in time, Fabio Wardley can utilise his speed and explosiveness and try to counter the more naturally fundamental fighter in Frazer Clarke. He needs to utilise his athletic ability more sensibly, in my opinion, in this rematch. And that's being a bit more cautious, that's being a bit more selective, that's being less reactionary and more proactive, impose more control kind of thing. Try to get Frazer to fight your fight more so than fighting his fight, more so than getting drawn into a war, because I felt he was guilty of that first time around. I felt he was trying to box with Frazer in that first fight early on in too much of a traditional style, whereas he wasn't really utilising what he does well. I think he can watch that first fight and really come up with some tactical adjustments that could give Frazer Clarke a lot of trouble. Frazer, on the other hand, like I said, I think he's more ingrained to box the way he boxed first time around, which is primarily behind the jab, and then going from there, trying to counter here and there, trying to land the straight, the overhand right, trying to keep it basic 1-2-3s. And, again, those fundamentals maybe still, they could still be a challenge for a raw guy like Fabio Wardley. So I'm not saying he needs to abandon those fundamentals at all. He's always going to fight like that. But I think with Frazer Clarke in this fight, I actually think he needs to be more aggressive behind those fundamentals. The first fight turned into a war, but it kind of turned into a war not due to either guy per se, in the sense of what I'm trying to say is, it didn't turn into a war because one guy wanted it that way. I think it just descended into that fight naturally, considering the tactics both guys were using. I feel in this fight, Frazer Clarke has to be more aggressive in the sense of, I think he needs to get close to Wardley. Wardley's got a very dangerous uppercut, but Frazer Clarke's a bigger dude. He's a heavier set guy. For me, one thing about Frazer Clarke in that first fight, he didn't work the body anywhere near enough. Frazer Clarke has shown good body work in the amateurs and his early pro fights, but it kind of went missing in that first fight. I want to see Frazer Clarke take the bull by the horns, high guard, ramrod jab, and try to walk down Fabio Wardley, try to crowd the space, try to get on his chest, try to move him around, try to work that body. And again, draw Frazer Clarke into that sort of fight, but this time, do it on your own terms. Because last time, I don't think that fight went on either guy's terms, to be honest. I think it turned into something crazy. But this time around, I want to see Frazer less boxing from the outside, more boxing on the front foot, trying to close the space. But in doing so, he needs to be very careful. He needs to be having a tight guard. He needs to be head slightly off centre line to evade that right hand, the straight right. And yeah, he needs to be closing that distance quickly. I think he needs to be the aggressor in this fight, and again use those fundamentals to get that done. But he needs to use those fundamentals to then impose his physicality, his extra weight, and then work that body. Try to fight on the inside. Try to smother Fabio Wardley. Try to smother the power. Because then he only really has to worry about the uppercut. Wardley's hook's not that great in my opinion. It's a bit slappy. But the uppercut is dangerous. But, again, if he gets that close to Wardley, it does nullify a lot of his weapons. It does nullify a lot of what he does well. It takes away a lot of his explosiveness. So yeah, for me, Wardley needs to be sniping. He needs to be making Frazer Clarke reach. He needs to be making him pay. Kind of like a merging from boxer to counterpuncher. Whereas Frazer Clarke needs to be the aggressor. He needs to be the pressure fighter here. With that being said, I've got a funny feeling this fight, this time around, goes in the favour of Fabio Wardley. I've just got a weird feeling he's going to knock out Frazer Clarke. He hurt him several times in the first fight. And dare I say, without that facial damage, maybe he would have stopped Frazer Clarke. This time around, I'm going Wardley by knockout. I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to say mid-rounds. I'm just going to say mid-rounds just so I've got something on paper. But yeah, we're going to go I'm going to go Fabio Wardley by knockout mid-rounds. I think he'll make the adjustments. I think he'll be a little more cautious. I think he may be able to get Frazer to reach, and I think he'll knock him out. Right hand, right uppercut, whatever it may be. But yeah, good fight, interesting fight. I'm hoping for another barn burner. We will see. Best fight on the undercard, without a doubt. Anyway, guys, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy, peace.